Hey, this week we talk about Ubuntu's really long-term support project, talk about Pipewire coming to OBS in a whole new way. There's all sorts of stuff going on with the kernel, maybe including C++, and then System76 teases an alpha for their Cosmic desktop environment. You don't want to miss it, so stay tuned.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is the Untitled Linux Show, episode 134, recorded January 13th. These go to 12.
This show is brought to you by members like you. Thanks.
Hey, welcome. It is Saturday, and you know what that means. It is time for some unbridled Linux geekiness. It's the Untitled Linux Show. It is, of course, not just me, but this week, it is just me and Jeff. Hey, Jeff, welcome.
Glad to be here. I got to get my dose of Linux in.
Yes. I am glad that you are here because, as I've said before, I don't do a monologue very well. I know there are some that do. It could be like a radio show, but I like having co-hosts. So I am glad that you are here.
I very much appreciate being here. It's always a treat.
Yeah. Now, you've got some stories, and the first one is a very long-term story. What's up with Ubuntu?
Yes. And, I don't want everybody to think that all I can talk about is Ubuntu. And I promise this is my only canonical story of the day. But that being said, I think most all of our audience knows that Ubuntu 22.04 is going to be coming out in a few months. What might not be known is that the LTS support is going to be changing. 2204 is going to be supported for 12 years. Now, support also means that not just the kernel, but all 30,000 plus packages are going to be getting security updates. Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, this is more than just a kernel. This is a big promise here. Canonical's also going to be giving that same support to some of the older LTS releases. Now, we don't have a list of those yet, so we don't know exactly which ones are going to have their support extended. But this is coming straight from Mark Shuttleworth himself. And he said, and this is a quote, "I don't want to steal anybody else's thunder, but essentially 12 years is what we are going to do for 2404. And we're going to go back and do that for some of the older ones as well." So no ambiguity there. It's going to happen. They're calling it Platinum Grade Enterprise Commitment. Now, while this might seem a long time, many in our audience know that RHEL or Red Hat Enterprise Linux has this support. So they're going to match Red Hat. So you know what they're trying to do. They want to steal a little thunder out of Red Hat's enterprise customers. You do have to sign up for Ubuntu Pro to get this support. But if you're only going to do 5 machines or less, you can sign up for free. If you have more than that, you need to get a hold of Canonical and get a price for an enterprise license, which I'm sure is probably based on, your size and whatnot. There's probably a few other things, and you negotiate the cost from there. I should also mention that before this announcement, we already knew that 24.04 was going to get 10 years of support. So this isn't a huge change from what they were already going to offer, but it is a bump. In the article, there's a link to an interview with Mark Shuttleworth where he also talks about Ubuntu and the general Linux community. So I would suggest following the link in the article and listening to the YouTube interview, because there are 2 things in there that caught my attention other than just the extension of the LTS releases. The first, there's something called Ubuntu Arkham, where they take all the security patches, which you would now find in an LTS release, and they're applied to the latest, greatest kernels. Now, I'll be honest, I've been searching for that, and so far I've not found anything. And I always have to exclude the term Batman, as that is the city where Batman comics take place. So, I'll be honest, not the best name to find something, because you are flooded with results having to do with Batman.
Yeah.
It is possible this isn't announced yet, but I'm still digging on this because, he mentioned it like, "Oh yeah, you don't know about this?" But I can't seem to find anything. So he might be talking before the official announcement. The second is his talk on making Linux more of a desktop competitor. And I think it also gives insight into what he does with Ubuntu, which, some don't like. He talks about leadership and that sometimes in the open source community, we're so free and open that we can sometimes fragment the ecosystem so much it can be hard for program developers. He gives an example of on the desktop, when a person or a group makes a program, there needs to be a lot of thought into how the program is going to look on all the different desktop environments, the KDEs, the gnomes, and so on. I'm not going to say he's correct or not. I mean, heck, there've been there have been interviews with Linus Torvalds saying the same thing, where it can be really hard for application programmers because things fork so much and things are different. The open source freedom is sometimes a double-edged sword. I'm not saying he's correct, but I think it explains and gives some insight to the things that Shuttleworth does, and where he tries to come up with competing standards to help solve problems of too many standards. And yes, he does mention the XKCD comic, so he is aware of that. For anyone not aware, the comic referenced two people talking about 14 competing standards. They think it's ridiculous and there needs to be one universal standard which covers all cases. And then it says soon there are 15 competing standards. Mm-hmm. So he is aware of this, but give the article and a video look, and let me know your thoughts on Discord.
So interesting stuff here. I was kind of surprised by the 12 years of support. I've always played in CentOS land and never with RHEL proper. And it did actually kind of surprise me. RHEL 6 is still supported. I had some RHEL 6 boxes way back in the day. And all I can say is I am glad I am not still running RHEL 6, because Linux has come a long ways since then.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but, and he even talks about snap packages in there, and how maybe you're running, say, he gives an example of like thousands of virtual machines, and you want to increment everything at the same time rather than having random packages come up. So every virtual machine is exactly identical, and then you can roll it forward 1 week, a month, or whatever term whatever you deem acceptable. And yeah, it's a very interesting interview. And like you said, Linux has come a long way, and it's continuing to go a long way. And, it's exciting, but going back to the 12 years, think about how far hardware has come in 12 years.
Right.
I mean, but you have those use cases where it runs, it does what I need, and I don't want to mess with it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, now I run into this in some industrial equipment where they build a specific driver to make hardware work. They don't want to go through that again or have to update, or because maybe there's 3 guys in the world that know how to do this, and there's 20 machines in the world. It's easier to say, well, stay on this LTS, and rather than, okay, we're going to reprogram this for the new kernel or new whatever.
Or the other thing that'll happen is it will eventually get reprogrammed. The driver gets rebuilt, but it's not right away. It takes potentially a long time for that to happen. I've run into those kind of support issues before with just some obscure hardware. So I can see it. I can see it making sense in certain cases. You've got a product life cycle, and to be able to push that life cycle out to 12 years makes sense for some people. So,
and they're going hard for Red Hat.
I think they are coming after Red Hat. Now, one of the interesting differences here is with Red Hat, to get those 6 years of support, you've got to be a paying subscriber. You have to be a paid customer. From what I understand, this is for everybody if you're running the Ubuntu LTS, right? Everybody can sign up for free as long as you're only signing up 5 machines or less. There is a limit there. Okay.
So the home user shouldn't have any kind of issue, most likely, or you're just going to have to limit yourself or make 2 accounts. But they're trying to open it up to everybody, I think, so that way maybe those big sysadmins and whatnot can get used to it at home and play with it, and then roll it into a much more enterprise license.
Yeah. Although, to be fair, I'm pretty sure Red Hat does have a similar system where you can sign up for a small handful of Red Hat licenses for free. It's their developer program or whatever they call it. So just to be fair, it exists on the other side of the fence.
Oh, okay. That I did not know. Because I always thought that was CentOS, and then when CentOS went away, I thought, oh, well, now it's only paid.
There are some other options there that they have put forth. All right, let us move on and let's talk about OBS and Pipewire and libcamera. So this is it's a story from 9 to 5 Linux about something that finally got merged into OBS, and this is the Pipewire camera. I believe it's through libcamera. Now there are a couple of different things that a handful of us in the Linux world have been kind of desperately waiting to see land into OBS, and this is essentially half of what we're looking for. This is OBS being able to take a video input from Pipewire. One of the reasons that this is important is sort of slowly the Linux camera world is moving away from video for Linux 2, V4L2, which has just been around forever, and it will continue to be around for quite some time. But you do have some cameras that are being added that do not have V4L2 support. What they have instead is something called libcamera support. And the way that is being implemented right now is as a Pipewire source, not as a V4L2 source. So this is going to allow OBS to work with those cameras. But what it also allows is for OBS to work with, from what I understand, basically any other Pipewire source, which as soon as another piece of work lands, could potentially be another OBS install. So another OBS instance. So one of the other things that's being worked on, it hasn't landed yet, but it's coming soon. There are finally people working on it, is the ability to have an OBS output for a Pipewire video output from OBS. And that is something that's going to be really, really neat, because then you can get away from things like the V4L2 loopback driver to be able to do like what we do here to loop the OBS output back to, say, the browser. Well, if you can do that inside of Pipewire, it's going to be easier. It's going to be more maintainable. It should be a little bit lighter on your system resources. Just overall, it's going to be a better solution. So definitely looking forward to those two things landing. One of them will be in OBS 31, and it's kind of a toss-up as to whether the Pipewire output is going to land in time or not. But fingers crossed. We hope it'll be there.
So you said half of what we want is the output, the other half that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Pipewire output is the other half.
I want to make sure I was fully up to speed on that. But.
Yeah. I mean, so I anticipate as soon as both of those things land, you're going to be able to do crazy things with OBS. Maybe eventually we'll be able to do things in OBS like you can do in Ardor. So if you have an external video manipulation plugin, well, you can go, take your video routing into OBS, into that plugin, and back into OBS. I mean, that would just be cool. I'm hoping that we will eventually land there.
Well, that would mean sky's the limit, because as long as you can pipe it wherever,
yep.
I mean, whatever you can plug it into.
Yeah, and that's always been the point. That's always been the point of Pipewire. That was one of the huge things that first landed in Jack back years and years ago. It was that idea that you could plug anything into anything, and Pipewire sort of inherited that because they re-implemented the Jack APIs. So I'm stoked to see it in OBS. It's going to be great.
Do we have any kind of general guess of when maybe we'll see the completed picture?
I'm guessing it'll be release 32. I don't know that it's all going to land in 31. So my partially educated guess is that we will see the rest of it land in 32. Maybe not all of the fancy bells and whistles, but the Pipewire input and output, and when exactly that's going to be. We're several months off still.
So we could possibly see it this year then.
Yes, I would expect to see it working this year. I don't know if they have a release date yet for 31. And I don't know that if they have it internally, I don't know if they would publish it yet.
Well, I just was kind of trying to get a feel of at least this year is probably good enough. So it's reasonable future. It's not some far away.
No, we're not talking about 10 years down the road. I expect to see a lot of these fun toys land this year. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
And we do use OBS. I'm using it right now.
There's something else. So this is, in fact, we're going to be talking on Floss Weekly. We're going to be talking to one of the devs behind OBS, actually, if I remember correctly, this coming Wednesday. So some of this will come up there. This really intrigued me. I don't know that we'll use it for the show here. We might. Apparently, they are adding to OBS the ability to do. I don't know if it's WebRTC, but audio video streams over the internet direct from one OBS instance to another, so that you wouldn't even have to go through Video Ninja or whatever you use to get to it. It's apparently going to be a direct connection thing, and that's going to be really interesting to play with too.
I think that would be kind of cool.
It might be. That might really change the kind of the landscape of doing shows like this. Right, might really bring some potential options to bear.
Might sound like one of those old timers someday. I remember we had to have OBS and pipe it into video, and we could only have this certain set of effects. And
yeah. I welcome the future. I think it's going to be neat. So there's another discussion about whether or not a particular project will welcome the future, and whether or not that idea of the future is a good idea.
This is
yeah. So this was on my list too. I was going to snag it if you didn't, but since you got it first, I will let you go for it. What's going on in Kernel land?
Well, everybody grab your pitchforks and torches. It's going to be one of those. So the kernel, for the most part, is written in C11 to be exact, and it's to be pedantic about it, it's a subset of C11 where not all options are allowed for greater compiler compatibility. Now, this was a recent change, as before that they were using C89, and this change happened in 2022. Now, I should mention, just for full disclosure, there are parts of the kernel written in assembler. They've been working to get these out of the kernel, but there's some disagreement if parts can ever completely go away from the assembly language in the kernel.
Right.
But just so somebody doesn't go, well, technically, we're hitting the high points, but we know about the other stuff. So now the talk is about having C++ for the kernel instead of C. Now, this isn't the first time this change has been brought up. In 2018, there were some patches submitted by a Red Hat engineer, David Howells, in an effort to try and get the kernel on C++. Unfortunately, that effort, well, or maybe fortunately, this again depends what side you're going to fall on, and this is divisive. That effort didn't really go anywhere. Anvin Pinsky, sorry if I messed that up, found the old thread and made a reply to it. And this is what he wrote. Andrew Pinsky recently made aware of this thread. I realize it was released on April 1st, 2018, and either was a joke or might have been taken as one. However, I think there's validity to it, and I'm going to try to motivate my opinion here. Both C and C++ have had a lot of development since 1999, and C++ has, in fact, in my personal opinion, finally grown up to be a better C for the kind of embedded programming that an OS kernel epitomizes. I'm going to say, as the author of a very large number of macro and inline assembly hacks in the kernel. What really makes me say this is that a lot of things we have recently asked for, GCC specific extensions, are in fact relatively easy to implement in standard C++, and in many cases allows for infrastructure improvement without global code changes. He says see below. C++ 14, in my opinion, is the minimum version that has reasonable metaprogramming support and has most of it without the type of hell of earlier C versions. C++ 11 had most of it, but C++ 14 fills in some key missing pieces. However, C++ 20 is really the main game changer in my opinion, although earlier versions could play a lot of SFNIAE hacks. Those are on capitals. Not fully sure what that is. They also gave absolutely useless barf as error messages. C++ 20 adds concepts, which makes it possible to actually get reasonable errors. There's even a mention of Rust, and he adds the following. Now, why not Rust? First of all, Rust uses a different, and he has this in parentheses, often in my opinion, gratuitously so, syntax. And not only would all the kernel developers need to become immediately familiar to the level of getting the same kind of feel as we have for C, but converting C code to Rust isn't something that can be done piecemeal. Whereas with some cleanups, the existing C code can be compiled as C++. However, I find that I disagree with some of David's conclusions. In fact, I believe David is unnecessarily pessimistic, at least given modern C++. Now, remember, David was talking in 2018. Note that there is no one in their sane mind would expect to use all the features of C++, just like we have with the kernel C, currently a subset of C11 with a relatively large set of allowed compiler-specific extensions. We would have kernel C++, which I would suggest to be strictly defined subset of C++ 20, combined with a similar set of compiler extensions. I realize C++ 20 compiler support is still very new for obvious reasons, so at least some of this is forward-looking. Now, I want to kind of summarize a little bit for maybe some of our newer audience. Whenever there's like C++ 20 or C11, that is generally the year that it was released. So like C11 would be 2011, C++ 20 would be the 2020 version. So that's why there's not a C++ 19, 18, 17, that sort of thing. Not generally released anyway. And basically what he's saying, now C++, as he feels, has matured enough that it can be used in the kernel with some limitations, just like C has some limitations. Now, I went and thought I would look at the community replies, which there are a ton. and this is like I said, grab your torch and pitchforks, but reading through many, I didn't read through them all because it was over 200. It fell into a few camps reading through many of them. So the first camp is we should go to C++ because it's newer, or it will simplify some things, or because of the new features it can offer to make things simpler. The second camp said we should go to Rust because it isn't hard to learn and it's better. And the third camp went into we should stick with C because it has the compiler stability. And when reviewing someone else's code, C is easier to understand because there's less complexity. I will be transparent and say I don't have enough technical programming knowledge to weigh in with any authority, but if anybody has thoughts, I would love to hear it.
So I find it interesting that Torvalds has not responded yet. As far as that I've seen, at least in the mailing list here. I was just flipping down through that. Because you were looking at the, say, probably the Phoronix comment thread, which is a very different thing from the actual LKML, the Linux kernel mailing list of responses. People tend to be a little bit more, how shall we say, sane in LKML than in the Phoronix comment threads.
But I kind of want to see what the community was versus the actual more of the developer mindset. Mm-hmm. And there are a couple examples where Linus is blatantly saying, no way is he going to allow C++ in the kernel. Right. But those are examples from, for example, 2004 and 2007, mm-hmm. which the standard has changed a lot since then. Because I know when I used to program C++ in college, it was brand new and it was very close to C. And it has moved away from, or at least it's not as close as it was. There's a lot more stuff in there than there was.
Yes. So it is still basically the case, in fact, by design, that pretty much any C program will compile as a C++ program. And that's actually fairly important because you end up including C headers in C++ programs to make things work. So it's fairly important that C is still considered valid C++. What they've done, though, is that they've added more and more things on top of C, more and more options, more fancy tools, so that you can, if you want to take advantage of all of those things in C++, you can. And at that point, it looks very different.
Well, and I should say for anybody just listening, I have a mostly white beard, and I was programming C++ in the mid '90s, so it has changed since the mid '90s.
Right. I'm part of a project right now where we're doing C++ programming for embedded stuff, and it's honestly pretty nice. Like, I enjoy writing in C++ most of the time. I wonder. I would imagine that if the kernel does pick this up, they're not going to go the route of being object oriented. They're still going to continue to do functional programming. So it's not going to be writing in C++. It's going to be continue writing in C while using a few of the things that C++ lets you do. Which, I mean, that makes sense to me. That's kind of how I write C++ too.
Right. And it seemed like there was some very kind of specific examples where things you could do in C++ that were much harder to do in C, and they were looking at compiler, like you mentioned in the story, compiler specific things. And so it sounded kind of like you're saying a lot of C, but here's some extra functions that can extend the language a little to relieve some headaches and built-in routines to kind of get around things.
Yeah, I mean, there are, I am sure, parts of the kernel where you would do well just being able to use the C++ strings, which are, really pretty nifty compared to the old care pointers from C. I do wonder how many of those fancy things are going to work for a kernel, because it is a very different, you're in a different world. You're in a very different world writing code for a kernel as opposed to writing code for an application that runs on top of a kernel. So that there's questions to be answered about that too. That's where we get to the point where I am not up enough to be able to comment on it really. But it'll be really interesting to see what the developer community, the people that actually make the decisions, what they have to say about this. I'm actually going to swap my two stories here because there is one that really fits here, I think. Go ahead.
Well, while you're doing that, I'm going to say Aaron in the Discord says that he's with me. He's not expert enough to have an informed opinion, but having said that, at work, they use a C++ compiler on mostly C code, and it's generally fine, but sometimes there are some odd behavior gotchas.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree with that.
It is called out even in the story that C++ 20 compiler, they don't have the time under them like the C compilers do.
Yeah, I have seen that on rare occasions as well, where C code will act just ever so slightly weird under C++. And I think you would be more likely to see that with the kernel, because parts of the kernel have C code that is not particularly recognizable as C code. It is some very weird and obscure stuff that's done on those very bottom layers to be able to make things work. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what happens. We'll keep an eye on it.
And just kind of a point of note, that's why they have some of that assembly in there, because there's certain things that you couldn't do in C that they just had to do in assembly.
Yep. You've got to be at a little bit lower layer to be able to make those just direct memory calls and your various things that you have to do as kind of part of the bootstrap process to have some functions that'll work with nothing else on the system. All right. It may be a while before we hear what Mr. Linus Torvalds has to say about that, because he is snowed in. There is a message on the mailing list from, I think that's from today. Yeah, from today, not too terribly long ago, that his power is out. Linus Torvalds himself, the power is out there thanks to a winter storm. And he says, of course, this is Oregon, so storms in quotation marks. And really, it's just somewhat windy, happens to be winter, and the temperature is approaching minus 10 degrees Celsius. But apparently there's like 100,000 people without power. And so he expects to be without power for something like a week. And he says, I know you're going to just tell me, go to Starbucks and work from there. And his comment is, the only thing more dangerous than the downed trees is the other drivers. So no, I'm going to stay put and hunker down. So things are kind of on pause as far as Torvalds goes. Now, there are still other maintainers that are going to be working. I would not be surprised if Greg KH steps in and sort of takes that head role while Torvalds is out, because that is sort of their plan. And we've interviewed Greg KH before about this, and they literally have these plans in place. You know, what if something happens to Linus or to Greg or to one of the other maintainers? So they've got things in place. They know who's going to take the reins. One of the things I've seen, I think Michael Larrable pointed out, we may see an extended merge window. This may be a 3-week merge window instead of a 2-week merge window, because the head honcho is out for, maybe up to a week. So interesting things with the 6. It's going to be, what is that going to be? 6.9?
6.9.
Yes. Going to be some interesting things.
No, sorry. It's the 6.8 merge window. Okay. Currently going on.
Right. Some interesting things potentially up with this 6.8 kernel. Maybe a week later, but if the merge window is open for that much longer, you might see a whole bunch of extra goodies packed in there. Another week's worth of work of merging. So could be interesting.
Well, very possible, because you get the last minute people that try to go in and last minute, which he hates. And just a side note, I'm in the Northwest in that storm, and yeah, it's we got blizzard warnings, and it's people are getting a record amounts of snow, so it's a pretty good one.
Yeah, it's cold here. It's going to be really cold over the next couple of days, but I'm far enough south, we're not really going to get any snow out of it. It doesn't look like.
Yeah, this weekend 8 to 12 inches, and where I'm at right now, we almost never get that. I mean, that's a rare snow to have that much snow.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's talk about the other thing going on with the 6.8 merge window. Also from Torvalds. What
Linus,
happened?
The character.
Yes.
The character that keeps giving. So, Linus is always one who's had very clear opinions on things. And, so less so nowadays, he used to sprinkle in some sentence enhancers back in the day. But, that rough, colorful language is more of a thing of the past, but that doesn't stop him from being really clear on what he thinks. So in the Linux mailing list, he's gone after Intel specifically about the XE drivers. And he called them out by saying, your testing is seriously lacking. Now, I'm going to read what he wrote with some paraphrasing and some technical details removed for clarity and brevity. I don't think you guys want me reading, long directories and code and error reports. So there's going to be some commentary where like, well, he shows a code or he shows this or whatever, and without actually reading what he put in there. So it starts out by saying, your testing is seriously lacking. This doesn't even build. The reason seems to be that commit, I leave out the number, DRM I915, replace custom Intel runtime PM tracker with ref_tracker library, change the Intel _wait_cur_f_t type from a depot_stack_handle_t to unsigned long. And as a result, it did this. Now, line here is where Linus just shows the difference between the code, what it was, and where the change happened. And he says, meanwhile, the XE driver has this, and then he shows the code snippet of pertaining to the XE driver. And he said, which has never been valid, but now the build fails with, and then he shows the error message. And he says, because the DRM header files have this disgusting thing where and he has asterisks around this header file includes a asterisk around it C file. And then so Linus shows some details of the header file.
That is pretty terrible, to be fair.
Yeah. And then Linus says nasty after that code snippet. He said, I made it build by fixing that broken XE compat header file, but this is definitely, and again, emphasize, not how things should have worked. How did this ever get to me without any kind of build testing? And why the, and it sounds like a cartoon character cussing, you know, parentheses, carrots, exclamation, ampersands, you know, does a header file include a C file? That is wrong, regardless of this bug, Linus. See, now that is the newer, softer Linus, because before it wouldn't have had the symbols in there. He would have had some actual words.
Well, so
very colorful.
I have been told that he actually just has basically a little regex program on his outgoing emails, and so this may have been the full fat Linus, and then it triggered that outgoing mail filter and took care of that for him.
That could be. Well, even Michael Arable even commented on how this message was tame compared to things Linus used to write back in the day.
True.
And for the record, he did go ahead and merge the code. So this will show up in 6.8. You know, the article, though, does question is this a one-time thing, or is there going to be other code issues? And maybe this error is just the tip of the iceberg. Yep. You know, as we say a lot on here, we'll wait and see. But it does bring into, did they even test this? Did it just get thrown in, or was it a one-time hiccup? You know, what's going on here if it won't compile?
So, and I am of two minds on this. First off, yes, it is terrible to send in code that doesn't even compile cleanly. But as I was telling Jeff before the show started, I sent some code into one of the projects that I'm a part of, and I just kind of broke everything when I did so. And so I was hustling around trying to unbreak that while getting ready for the show. So I understand how it goes. One of the other interesting things is Linus went ahead and pulled it. We have seen in the past, though, that he is not afraid to revert things. Like if they get into testing or even a little bit further into the merge window and things start breaking, he would have absolutely no problem of just reverting this pull, kicking it all back out. Let's try again next time, guys, and make sure it actually compiles before you send it to me.
And we've seen it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he doesn't take any guff.
No, I was fairly concerned when Torvalds took a step back and said he was going to be kindler and gentler, because of the head honcho at Linux, the benevolent dictator. It's sort of a cat herding position, right? Among other things, and I'm of the opinion that you need somebody that is a straight shooter, like absolutely lays it down and tells you where things are wrong, for the Linux kernel to work, for that kind of collaborative process to work at all. And so I am glad to see that he is still willing to yell at people and be very, very blunt when things are broken. Because when you have this many developers working together, in my opinion, that is the only way to make it work.
Well, and this goes back to my other story with Mark Shuttleworth. And he said what the desktop Linux to make it succeed is leadership. Partially that very reason is that sure, you get too many cats running different directions, and sometimes you need some leadership to go, okay, here's some boundary conditions you need to stay in to make things work smoothly.
Yeah, it's fair to say. And the way that exactly plays out with your Linux desktop is very different from how that plays out with the Linux kernel, right? Because over at the kernel, Torvalds is literally a benevolent dictator. He's kind of the last decision maker. And so if he sees something that's just repugnant to him, he can make the call and say, no, that's not making it into the kernel. Whereas if in Ubuntu, Mark Shuttleworth sees something that's repugnant to him, well, yeah, he can keep it out of Ubuntu, but it might get packaged in Fedora. It might get packaged in Slack. And so there is this little bit different process between those two. But I would agree that it's good to have, some safety rails to keep keep everybody on sort of the same road. Because
Well, I mean, what
if things got too crazy and too fragmented, you would actually get into to a point to where it would be extremely difficult to have one code base that runs on all the different flavors of Linux. But there is sort of a pressure even from the outside community, from the programmers writing the applications, that it's real nice if we can just have one code base that runs on Linux and it works on all these different distros. So I don't know. There's a lot of moving parts there.
Right. Well, but let's just take the desktop, for example, and we'll just say KDE and GNOME just to keep it simple without rattling off 10 different ones. What if there was a certain set of standards that said, okay, when programs make these certain function calls, this is how it's going to be handled no matter what desktop environment you're in. So you have kind of a base standard. Now it still leaves. That's
basically what Wayland is. To be honest, that's part of Wayland is that it defines a lot of those. Now you've got calls specific to KDE or GNOME, but it's not that many. There's a lot of those calls are just for Wayland, and then KDE or GNOME interprets those in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well,
sorry,
and like I said, I
didn't mean to cut you off there.
No. That's you know more about this than I do. I'm just looking at at kind of what. At a certain point, you do have to have some basic standards, because even Linus years and years ago talked about a Scuba program that they had that they weren't going to put on Linux just because at the time, now this is 20 years ago or whatever, that they said putting it on there, it's like every distribution you had to have a different version because it was just all over the place and nobody had any versus as much as people say, oh, I hate Windows, but you write one program and it runs everywhere and it gives you predictable output most of the time. Most of the time. Things continue to change there. Now I do think Linux has gotten a lot better with standardizing a lot of the directories and stuff, where to find things, so it's not there's less scattering of libraries all over, you know. Well, I mean, we're not going hell to breakfast anymore. But we've talked before about this weird idea that if you want something to work on Linux for a long time, you build it for Windows and then make sure it runs under Wine, and that will pretty much make it work forever. Mm-hmm. Which is sort of terrible, but seems to be the way it works out. Because you go back to even video games from a few years ago. If they had a Linux release, well, good luck getting that Linux binary to run on a modern system, because things have deprecated and changed and updated. But if they're the Windows binary, it'll run under Wine. Sure, no problem. Mm-hmm. Well, and it used to be, I know there was a lot of, okay, if you're on this, put this library here. If you're on this other distribution, put it there. Oh, okay, that's true. Even just where you put your files was kind of all over the place. Yeah. But I mean, I know it's gotten a lot better, and there's still work on saying, okay, let's just have kind of one file system. Yeah, and that's true. It's true. All right. Well, let's look at something else that is very distro specific. Another one of these little problems that we are working out, and that is PyTorch. And the entire machine learning sort of structure that we have on Linux. So this is specifically about Fedora 40, and they are looking to package up PyTorch. Now, PyTorch is available as part of pip, and so you can do like something like pip3 install torch, and you're going to get PyTorch installed via pip, which is it's the Python package manager. Well, there is something to be said for having these packages packaged up as distro packages rather than just being installed from pip. And so they're looking at doing this in Fedora 40. There's a lot of complexity with this. One of the reasons being that PyTorch really likes doing GPU acceleration. Now, a lot of things can do CPU acceleration, and apparently that's going to be the initial focus for this. But there's some other things that they're trying to do with Fedora 40. For example, getting the AMD HIP, and I forget the other term they use, but AMD has a GPU acceleration framework, and it's a pain. It is a huge pain to get installed. It's basically as bad
AMD's machine learning stuff is basically as bad to get installed as NVIDIA's GPU stuff. Maybe maybe worse, because you have folks working really hard to make the NVIDIA stuff work. So RPM Fusion or what have you. But anyway, PyTorch getting packaged up for Fedora, I think maybe is a kind of a sign of things to come, because there's this project and then there's some other things where they are working to make all of this work out of the box. And that would be really interesting to me, because there's some things that you can do that's machine learning, picture generation, let's say, you where you can give machine learning a prompt, it'll spit you a picture back, or text to speech, speech to text. That gets really good with some of these machine learning frameworks, and being able to run that on your GPU is going to work a lot better than just the CPU models. So I think it would really be pretty interesting if Fedora really embraced that and made it work on ideally on both AMD and NVIDIA video cards. I don't necessarily feel like Fedora is the blocker there with it being NVIDIA, but it would be nice to see still.
Yeah, it's and kind of a side note, part of the reason that they're saying some video cards now are coming with 16 gigabytes of RAM, because that's what's needed for AI. So even if you're lower ones, people say, "Oh, it's not needed for games." But if you want to run some of these kind of home AI things, you're going to want 16 gigs on your video card.
Oh, interesting. I had kind of wondered, because it's like surely not every video game has well, I guess they do. They have the textures for 4K, but you don't have to have those turned on if you don't have a 4K monitor. That makes sense, though.
Right.
Be able to load that entire large language model, LLM database, or what have you, the machine learning
large
model
database or something.
Yeah, the machine learning model, that entire block of binary loaded all the way into the GPU at once. It's going to be a lot faster. It makes sense. Definitely does. All right. You want to talk about what happens when we crash?
Yeah. So if you're running a Linux server or even your home computer and you have something you deem very important that needs to keep running, the link in the show notes shows a few different ways you can make sure that program will run when booting or when restarting after a crash, or even if your program crashes. So now, again, I'm not going to go through all the steps here, but the first method that they list in the article is using the systemd service. Now, it goes through the steps of how you make a your app.service file, what needs to go into it. And once you make the systemd file, it then goes through on how you can then make sure systemd auto starts when the program every time your machine boots up. And it goes in, and if you want to manually stop, start, or if you just say, I want to totally remove the program so it doesn't auto start all the time, it tells you how to do that. The second method is to use keep alive scripts, and they're a lot like what they sound like. They go over a script that can check if your program is running, and if not, start it. It then can be called by a cron job to set the frequency you want to check to keep it running. Maybe it's once an hour is fine, once a minute, once a day, whatever you deem is necessary for your program. For those that don't know, cron's a program that we have gone over on this show before, so you can listen to a previous episode. But the short version is it's a Linux program which is always running in the background and will perform a user-defined function at whatever frequency you want that to happen. So it'll call your keep alive script at whatever frequency, and it'll check and make sure your programming is running, and if not, start it. The third option is using supervisord. Now, this is a process control system which lets you monitor and control processes or programs. Just like the others, it can restart programs if they crash or if there's a reboot. Now, unlike the others, you will need to install supervisord. And yes, I know there are distributions which don't use systemd, but we're talking about the main distributions here and not corner cases. Once installed, and the article tells you how to install it, it goes over setting up a configuration file similar to the systemd option, and you can start, stop, auto start, auto restart your program if you want to keep alive. For the full details, see the article linked in the show notes for full step-by-step instructions and syntax for the methods mentioned. Though I will say, I hope your programs never crash, and may you never have a core dump and all your reboots are scheduled. But, well, we know about real life, though.
Yes. So I am familiar with two of those things. I am not familiar with Supervisor D. That intrigues me quite a bit. It almost seems like it could be a replacement for System D, although I'm seeing in their documentation that that particularly is not intended to be your process ID 1. It's not supposed to be a replacement for that.
It's kind of a replacement for, I don't know if I'm probably not articulating this correctly, but it's kind of like the second level of System D. It's handling the running of the processes, but it's not meant to kick off the operating system. It's just once things are up and running, okay, I can take control of this and make it work.
And one real fascinating thing about this is apparently it works on macOS, Solaris, FreeBSD, as well as Linux. So anything that is Unix, which I guess gives you kind of a broader area where it could be useful. It's fascinating. I'm not familiar with it, but it looks like something might be worth looking into. Very cool. All right. And then one other story that we have been sort of keeping our fingers on the pulse of, and that is Cosmic, System 76's Cosmic desktop environment. It has historically been a series of patches on top of GNOME, but they are rewriting it to be its own desktop environment. And we've been sort of eagerly looking forward to this because it looks like it could be pretty interesting. Well, they are in the process of sort of completing their checklist of things that need to be in there for it to be usable. So there's a few remaining features that they really want to get in. And then they're trying to get some bug fixes taken care of and get sort of the visual design to all be cohesive. And then at that point, it's off to ISO files. And yeah, as soon as February or March, we could see an alpha release of Cosmic. So next month, really, we're looking forward to the monthly update. And then this month, one of the other things that they really want to show off is the Cosmic Terminal, and some interesting things in there. One of the ones that they are really proud of is being able to display an 8 megabyte text file without particularly slowing down. Which is fairly impressive. And then they've also got a command line utility, Cosmic Randr, or RandR, which is obviously intended to be a replacement for the Xrandr, but under Wayland now. And a few other things that they're working on that really do look pretty fascinating. They've got a frosted glass effect. They say, unfortunately, there's no way to animate that for when you actually exhale on your screen. But still, it looks, it sounds like it could be pretty interesting. It's just some eye candy on top of it. I am pretty interested in Cosmic, especially for the laptop here when it finally comes out. I may have to update to the newest Pop OS when that happens and give Cosmic a try.
Well, I'll say sometimes eye candy's half the fun.
Well, that's true. Yeah. That's true.
I remember spending a lot of time when KDE originally had the cube and the spinning, where you could play a video and it would show up on the cube and spin and warp and all that kind of stuff. So I definitely look forward to that. And, I think System 76 does a good job at stuff. Mm-hmm. And that would be one I would like to see how it really pans out and works in the real world, because a lot of times I'm not, people come out with, oh, we got a new display manager, and okay, I'm not super excited, but Cosmic is one I'm really, I want to check out. I want to see how it goes.
I think part of the reason why it's easier to get excited about Cosmic is because they're doing it such out in the open. It seems like when Ubuntu did this with Mur back years ago, they just sort of hoisted it on everybody. Whereas System 76 has kind of been trying to hype it up the entire time. I'm very open about what's going into it and where the process is, and kind of easing people into it a little bit more, I guess, getting people used to the idea. And one of the other interesting things that they talk about is Cosmic is going to be for more than just System 76. So, if you like your Fedora, but you would really love some Cosmic action, well, that'll probably be a thing, or Slack or Ubuntu or what have you.
Be a Kubuntu out there with a C with Cosmic on it instead of a K for KDE.
Yeah, I don't know. How's that going to work? Maybe it'll be Cosbuntu.
Or that. Well, normally it's just the first letter and then Ubuntu. So
right. But if you actually say it out loud to somebody, they're not going to know what you're talking about.
Cbuntu or something.
I suppose.
I don't know. We'll see. I mean, it's either going to. Well, I mean, it's got one of three options really. It's going to come out and then people go, oh, and it's going to die. 2, it's going to, oh, it's not bad. And it's going to have a following and it's going to kind of linger around for a while, or people are just going to love it and it's going to be up there with KDE and GNOME. And
I can't see it replacing KDE. But I don't know. You might see some people jump ship off of GNOME.
Well, maybe not replace, but I mean, it'll be at least at that level of, popularity.
Right. Just knowing where the Cosmic folks come from, where System 76 and Pop! OS comes from. It's been a GNOME shop for a long time. They're going to be more on the GNOME side of the street. So I guess I'm saying I can't really see them stealing a whole lot of people off of KDE, particularly as good as KDE 6 is. But I could see people maybe jumping ship off of GNOME to go over to it. We will see.
Well, I mean, and especially if GNOME has another distribution version where they break a lot of things.
Break all the things.
and take a left turn for what their users want. And, and I get, you can't design by committee. I fully understand that.
Right.
But at the same time, if, you've got a universally hated thing you're doing, it's like,
something went wrong there, guys.
Yeah, there's, and I've heard you need to give people what they need, not necessarily what they want. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, when people are screaming that you're going to drive off a cliff, you kind of have to stop and reevaluate. Well, are we going off a cliff, or,
yep,
is this a new innovation that people haven't realized yet?
Yep. Sometimes it's difficult to tell the difference.
Yeah, but GNOME seems to be running off a cliff a few more times, at least by their user reactions to some of their breakages and changes they make.
Yep. All right. Well, that is a pretty good handle on the stories, the news from the week. Let's get into some command line tips. And we're going to let Jeff kick it off. What is it mcomix?
mcomix. Now, this came about because, I will freely admit I'm kind of a geek, and sometimes I enjoy reading comic books still. I grew up with them as a kid, and it's still fun to read. And I think some of the, side note here, I think some of the best storytelling still is in comics and graphic novels. I think it's a little more open and free. That being said, I downloaded one, and Ocular on KDE will read a lot of comic books. It'll handle that, was it CDB format? Well, I ran into one that it wouldn't. And I'm like, what in the heck is going on? Well, it was packaged with a RAR container. Sorry, CBR. Well, you have a CBR, CBZ, CB7, and some other formats. And they're kind of container formats. And sometimes they zip up the artwork and the stories, to kind of shrink them down a little bit. Well, this had one of the compression algorithms was RAR. Well, Ocular couldn't handle that. So I started looking around and I ran across mcomix. Now there's many ways you can get it. It's in several repositories. You can get a flat pack, you can get a snap, I have a link to the, where you can directly download it. They have various instructions on different ways to install it, but basically it will handle the RAR compressed format among a ton of other compressions formats. So if you have a comic book, in this digital format, it's probably going to be able to read it. It's a branch from an earlier program that kind of got stopped getting supported, just kind of languished. So somebody picked it up and ran with it. Mm-hmm. It does have a lot of features, various full screens, how you skip pages, best fit, manual zooms. You can single or double page. I mean, there's a whole, however you want to view it, it probably supports that way to view it. Mm-hmm. So if you like to read comics, give mcomix a install. It works really good. I really like it as a comics reader because it's really nice for setting up the format how I like to best read it.
Yeah, very cool. I don't do comics so much, but occasionally the graphic novel. So it could be fascinating to take a look at. All right, I have got something.
I was going to say the difference between a comic and a graphic novel is the number of pages.
Well, a lot of times in the graphic novel, you read from right to left too. There's that.
Oh, well, it does support I think they call it manga style.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It supports that.
Cool.
You can reverse the pages, so it.
There's one of the old animes that I enjoy. It's a driving anime, and I was at a bookstore one time, and it's like, oh, they have a translated copy, official translated copy of the manga. So it's like, oh, it's only a few bucks, and picked up one of them, and got it and started looking at it. It's like, wait a second, this doesn't make any sense. And it's like, oh, turn it over and read from this side. It's like it's the first time I've actually held something physical that worked that way, huh?
Which makes sense because a lot of Asian languages read from right to left.
Yep, Japanese being one of them. That's exactly why that is the case. All right. Well, speaking of that idea of taking things and translating them, I've got a command line tip that is all about that, and it is Darling. So darlinghq.org is where you can find out more information about this. And I've got to admit, I've not used this one myself, but when I came across it, I thought, ooh, this is fascinating. I need to let folks know about it. Darling is for macOS software what Wine is for Windows software. It lets you run macOS binaries directly on Linux without using a hardware emulator. It's the same thing as what Wine does. It takes and it interprets system calls. It's free. It's open source software. It is actually legal and not a violation of the Mac terms of service because it is all based on the open source software from the Darwin project. Now, it, from what I can tell, works very well with command line applications and is slowly but surely making progress on running graphical applications. It is not there yet on that front. So you're probably not going to be able to run Xcode or, a video game for macOS. Those sorts of things are just not going to work. But there is the possibility now. And one of the other interesting things that they say as part of the project's FAQ is that in the long run, they are planning to also offer iOS support, be able to run iOS apps on ARM devices like Android phones or ARM computers. So really, really, really interesting project that potentially has some neat future to it. So if you've got an application that is macOS only and you really want to run it on Linux, see if maybe it'll come up under Darling.
Nice.
Yeah. All right, sir. Any closing thoughts or anything you want to plug before we go?
Well, actually, you are going to be able to see me somewhere else. So I'm going to plug myself on this month, January, on the 24th. I'm going to be helping Jonathan host. I'm co-hosting, or I'm a training wheel, whatever, for Floss Weekly.
Yes.
So I'm going to be on there, and I look forward to seeing everybody. And other than that, I hope everyone has a wonderful week.
Yes. I look forward to having you there as well. We've had a couple of the co-hosts that for various reasons are not available for a bit between scheduling conflicts and work conflicts. And so I've thought about it. It's like, well, who do I know that has a good microphone that could be on there? So you got in by the the power of your microphone. But it'll be fun. It'll be fun. I'm looking forward to it. I will go ahead and mention you can follow me over at Hackaday. We've got Floss Weekly there, and we've got the security column. Floss goes live pretty much every Wednesday at it is 6 p.m. my time. So you'll have to work that out. That's 6 o'clock Central Time. Work that out for your various time zones. And then the security column goes live on Friday mornings. Yeah, I think that is about it. I wanted to say thank you, sir, for being here as part of the show. Thank you to everyone in the live chat and all of you who watch us on the download. We sure appreciate it. And hey, we'll see you next time on the Untitled Linux Show.